Hello and welcome back to another episode of Music Nuggets. Today's nugget is all about, or mostly about, Ray Charles and the value of learning from other instruments, just for teaching you things about how different chords work in a progression. And this specifically is all dominant chords, so it's particularly interesting in that some dominant chords can feel like home, even though a dominant chord is typically chord 5. And some dominant chords can feel like they are turnaround chords, some can feel like they are traveling somewhere. So this is what this is all about. First of all, I used to play in a rock and roll band, so this is why I've been inspired to do this. I think probably learned the most I've learned about harmony from being in a 4-piece rock and roll band and having to imply brass sections and keyboard parts and piano parts, and this is a really good example. So this is Ray Charles' version of Let the Good Times Roll, and it's basically a big band arrangement and lots of horns making up chord progressions, horns voice leading through chord progressions. So let's just jump in and see what it's all about. The first chord, the home chord, you could consider this to be, is a G13. So I think if you have a 13 in a dominant chord, it can make it sound balanced and make it sound like home. And I think that's why it's being used here. But at the same time, it's got a flavour to it. It's a little bit spicy, a little bit sleazy sounding, especially the way it's played. It's kind of lurching, so. And then a lot happens in the next bar, and really, like, we could have just did this like it continues on G for that whole bar. It was a 4-piece band, so 2 guitars. The other guitar player was the singer, bass player and drums, and you know, we could have just been like, but we wanted to make it as authentic as possible, and just really bring out the sound of the song the way it is. So my challenge was to figure out all these voice leading things on brass instruments as chords. There's some information on the internet there. There's usually information about anything on the internet. So I did a bit of digging, combined lots of different things and used my ears a lot. And the conclusion I came to was that the voicings were basically doing this between all the horns. So this is where this voicing comes in. F7, sharp 9, sharp 5. And you'll see in brackets here, I've got flat 13 under the sharp 5, because you could consider it a flat 13 in some cases. It just depends on the function of the chord. It's basically traveling through 2 of those, a semitone apart from each other, and then it goes to this chord. And all of this is like super sleazy, like Naked Gun type brass section arrangement, and I love it. But yeah, I think what this is doing really is it's implying a couple of turnarounds. So it's implying, like, I would say that the F7 is out on its own. The chord, we've got root 3rd, 7th, flat 7th. That is the sharp 9. So that's basically a Hendrix chord. You know, if you put that on the 7th fret, then you've got, well, we've got it up on the 8th. And for extra tension still, we've got this sharp 5 or flat 13, however you want to see it, on the top. And I think what that's doing is that's just a complementary chord to add extra chromatic movement. And then here what I think is happening is you've got a couple of 2/5s starting, a couple of 2/5 chord progressions. So you've got, and then, so that's basically like going E7 to A7. So if I put an A bass on the bottom of that, it's really tense, but it's a fleeting thing, and the whole point in it is you're getting chromatic movement, or chromatic movement to begin with, and then sort of stepwise movement. and then it stays on that note. So if you analyze all the voices there, what we've got there is essentially a 2/5, two 2/5s leading down to G. So you've got E7 is the 2 chord in this case, or a secondary dominant to A7. You could see it's a 5 chord actually. Secondary dominant to A7, and then the A7 then becomes a secondary dominant to the D7, and then the D7 is the dominant chord to the home chord. So it's just a really fast turnaround. And if you look at all the voices in there, it's really cool in that it's basically all descending in a really interesting way, in a really like tight way. So you've got, so the top voice, and then there might be a 9th in the home chord. If there's not, then it's just going down to a root. So you've got, and the other voices are doing similar things. So it's going like, and then that one's going, and it's happening all over it basically. You've got, which is super cool. And I would never have thought to voice something like that myself. Not as tight as that anyway. Because it's not that obvious to begin with. When I started listening to this to learn it, it's like, what on earth is going on? So yeah, it's doing this chord, down a semitone, then this chord, and then it does this chord again on D. So, and that's a G7 sharp 9, root, 3rd, 7, sharp 9. Another Hendrix chord, but in a different voicing. That's like playing that up here, but it's here. And that is turning around to the 4 chord of the progression. So that's what brings us into the 4 chord. So it's a really elaborate like run into the 4 chord there. I would say that all these are really like, they're function as secondary dominants, and they are for traveling voice-wise. It's both functions. Then it sits on this for a while, so this is a C9. So root, 3rd, flat 7, 9th. I've not mapped up a 9th here. In fact, I've mapped up an A9, so you could play that up there like this. Exact same voices, just from a 4th string root rather than a 5th string root. And I think 9th chords are good for that settled but kind of sleazy thing as well. So similar function to 13th chords. And then it does, this is basically the 4 diminished trick to turn back around to the 1 chord. So it's like, it does a little diminished chord from the 5th of the C. So that's the same as actually playing C sharp diminished. So that's like that trick of like, doing a diminished chord, a semitone up from the 4 chord to turn back around to the 1 chord. And then it does, let me think. Oh, there's some cool voice movement here. So it's going, it sits on a G7, then it adds the 13. And that's so that the voices are going, because it's traveling up to E7 flat 9. So like, and then that moves back down again with the fifth of an A7. And then, just as a little embellishment, it slides into a higher voicing, an octave up voicing of an A7 with a ninth added, which is super cool too. It just adds a bit of colour to that. And then the same sort of turnaround again with one chord missing. And then this is like one of the most common turnarounds you'll hear in blues, is an E7 flat 9 to an A7 to a D7 flat 9. And the reason for that is so that you can bring in this motif. Yeah, so you got, and that's in the upper voices of these chords. So that's these two notes. And then if you slide those two notes down a semitone, they become the third and the fifth of the A7. And then if you play a D7 with a flat 9, so this chord again, but on the 5th fret, you have the same voice sliding down another semitone, which then leads into the home chord down a semitone. So even though these are turnaround chords, they have a function in their voices too. I mean, you could just play that as like, but that sounds so play school compared to if you use these kind of voicings, you know? Compare that to, so this is the reason, or one of the reasons that people use these different voices of dominant chords. It depends on your journey, it depends on how you want things to turn around and how you want chords to move. But yeah, I think there's so much value to, instead of copping out and just thinking we're a guitar band, we'll just go with the block voicings or whatever chord structure you can find online. Try and really focus in on what makes the song cool. Try and focus in on what makes the song feel good. So case number 2 of the value for learning from other instruments. Another Ray Charles song, and it's Mess Around. So again, you could just chunk away on, what is it? You could just chunk away on a chord like that, come straight in with a 4-click and just imagine that the piano is there, or you could try and figure out what the piano is doing. And there's lots of benefits to that, besides making the song sound and feel like it should. There's also like little licks to be learned that when you learn certain voicings and certain movements from other instruments, you start to realize that you live in a box as a guitarist. You live in a little positional box, and other licks come out of learning these other things. So like even the intro of Mess Around is a really good example. Like so that's great just for like, normally we'd be thinking as guitarists that would be like, what would even be the way to do that? So that's like a root and a 7, so we go, we'd maybe do something like that, which is cool. It kind of sounds just as good. But then you've got to work out how to travel through the different octaves. So now you start to be able to see the chords. So it's an E flat, it's like an E flat dominant thing. So like, and you know, I figured it out from ear just by moving in this direction. It seemed like the most logical way to go because of all these little double stops. So now, instead of just like living in that little box, I'm seeing this shape. I'm seeing that shape of E7, whereas normally we'd be here or here, but now we're here. We're seeing it more like that sort of thing. And then here. So that's traveling like root and third, and that's traveling down through the 7th, the 6th, the 5th, and then little double stops on the 3rd and the 7th. And then trying to find it somewhere else as well. So like root, 7th, 6th, 5th, and then 3rd. And it makes all the difference when it resolves to that 4 chord, when it comes into the 4 chord, because then you've got that full journey. It kind of feels more like the piano thing. It's not a piano, obviously, but you've implied so much more of the song. So there's so much in there in terms of just little licks and things to take from it. Little ways that you can vamp on chord progressions. Like if you've ever got, or even just this thing. So like, that's probably not what most guitarists would choose to play over a dominant chord, because it's like, it's starting off with the 9th, 9th root, 7th, 5th, and then it travels back down through those notes from the root and then into the 4th. So it's like, instead of the typical guitar stuff that we do, like, we've got this, and then that is quite a guitar-y thing. I'm not even sure if I've maybe adjusted that quite a lot. It's been a while since I've listened to the song. And then that's like a little Bo Diddley kind of thing. 6 chords. That's a really neat trick. Like you can use root. So this is over a B flat 7 chord. You can use root, 3rd, 6th or 13th, however you want to see it, and then slide it down a tone, and it becomes the 7th, the 9th, and the 5th of the chord. So it's still really consonant and harmonious with the chord. You know, so like put that in A and put a pedal on it, like. It's quite a used sound, and a neat trick to know, just because it's like, it's right there, it's the same shape, just slid around. You can get little licks out of it. So yeah, useful little thing. Oh, and the next thing, that's really useful. That's maybe something that we wouldn't naturally do as guitar players, but it's a really cool, like, syncopated little vamp thing. So what I'm doing is I'm sliding, that's the 5th, flat 7th, and 3rd of the Homecourt of an E flat 7. And you slide it up from a semitone below, and then you go, and then it's all like really syncopated offbeats. And it's quite under the fingers, but again, maybe not something that you would think to do as a guitar player. Probably because it is so tight, it's so under the fingers. And then that goes round to the 4 chord, and you've got the. And there are some things that you have to adjust when you're in a 4-piece band, because certain things that are played on brass, if they use a third against, or a minor third against a major third, it sounds good. If you play it on guitar, the timbre and texture of that instrument sometimes dictates that it doesn't sound good. So this is a good case of that. So you've got the and what happens on the record is it goes, and for us it just sounded a bit too rude, and it made more sense to actually go with the voicing of the chords. So instead of like over over the E flat 7, instead of going, change that to, so it's going, and again, that's like an interesting way of seeing the fretboard just from learning from a piano song, because there's things that you can do with that little motif. That, in a typical guitar position, would probably be really difficult to do. Yeah, so that's like, because most of the time we would think about that being over that shape and not necessarily that shape. So certain things start to roll off the fingers differently. You notice ways of playing little licks that you wouldn't otherwise if you hadn't learned from this piano song. Is there a smarter way to do that up here? No, that's even harder. You know, so that's the equivalent of, if you're thinking about it as that position of that chord, then playing the 3rd, the root, the 7th. And it doesn't pull off as nicely, you know? And you could combine that with other things. So yeah, another like reason that I think learning from other instruments and really trying to be faithful to arrangements can help. And as you can see, I've taken things there and changed them and taken liberties. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think one really important thing is audiences really expect to hear certain things within songs. Like, there's a reason that song was a hit, and a lot of the time it's the little motifs and the way that things move within voices that the audiences actually really hear. You hear different people like humming or whistling a tune like that. You'll hear them whistling the voices within chords, sometimes not even melodies. So that's telling, I think. Yeah, maybe talk about one or two more. I think this is a really, fruitful subject, and playing in a band where you have to figure these things out. Like I've done a lot of wedding work as well. The soul and rock and roll stuff was really interesting, but the wedding stuff somewhat less interesting. But even still, you can make it a challenge for yourself. If you don't have a keyboard player, then learn all the keyboard parts, or try and imply all the keyboard parts in some way. But I'll not bore you with those things. Maybe look at another couple of rock and roll things. So another great example. I'll put all these things down below in the description. I'll put links to the videos of these songs so that you can hear for yourself and judge whether it was faithful or not. But another interesting example is Cool Jerk by the Capitals. Basically, being a 4-piece band, there was one extra part that we had to cover to make this thing sound complete, to sound good. And that is, it starts with a piano riff, so it's like, and then the rest of the band comes in, and that's the left hand of the piano. Then the right hand of the piano starts going, or something to that effect. It sustains chords over the left hand riff. At the same time, there's a guitar lick that's doing something along the lines of, just kind of like every sort of offbeat of the bar. And so we had the other guitar player doing that. The bass player is obviously playing the piano riff, but if I were to leave the riff, then especially with the tone I'm using, it just starts to sound empty. So if I was to leave that riff to come and play it really sounds empty, because you've taken something out and created a lot of space with that sustaining chord. At the same time, it needs that sustaining chord, so your job becomes, how can I play those two parts at once? And it's really just about thinking about what matters in that chord. And the riff is completely implying the root, because every downbeat it's hitting. So it's hitting the root of that chord. It's one of these chords, but in E flat. So the third and the seventh is what really matters, and it's just thinking about how can I rearrange the fingering of this riff so that I can keep that held and sustained, and a little bit of patting your head and rubbing your belly and working out how to play those two things together, and I arrived at this. So like, and it made all the difference to the sort of authenticity of the arrangement. Until now we've been looking at mostly like really filling things out and having lots of voices within the chords. Another great example of playing what people expect and making sure that motifs from songs are in songs that people want to hear is Try a Little Tenderness by Otis Redding, and it's kind of the opposite of what we've been looking at so far. So it's more of a minimalist thing, and so the intro goes like, and I think it's a really beautiful example of, if you used chord voicings there, it just wouldn't have as much impact. Again, it's one that people really expect to hear. But if you were to do that as chords, it would maybe be like, which is clearly, it just doesn't feel as good. And I think there's a good lesson to be learned there about sometimes less is more, and sometimes simple counterpoint is really effective. And it's certainly, from learning things like that, it's really helped me in how I write things. Sometimes that's what's required in a song. Sometimes it feels much better if you just do something like that. There's two voices in there. Yeah, so there's nothing to that really. And then the other voice, I think one's a trumpet and one's a sax maybe. And it's just working out a way to put those together. Obviously muscle memory takes over once you've learned it. There's other great things in that song, just like inversions of chords and stuff like that, like the... But I'll not go into that just now. I think that's plenty of material and plenty to demonstrate the point that there's so much to be learned from really focusing on the arrangement of songs, focusing on voice leading and voice movement, really learning what happens in the original and trying your best to pull that off. Hopefully you learned something from the little bit about dominant chords. That's the nugget for today. If you like, the rest is really just talking about philosophy and how to approach learning songs. So hopefully you found that informative. If you liked what you saw, hit the like button down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Thanks very much. Bye bye.